Hello everyone, have a nice evening. Enjoy a good ghost story with the gentle sound of rain from Blackridge Stories, and sleep well. If you find these stories interesting, please subscribe and comment for me. Thank you very much everyone, and now, without further ado, let's go to part one of the story. The Ghost of Merrill Auditorium, Portland, Maine. There's a certain grandeur to Merrill Auditorium in Portland, Maine. A quiet elegance in its ornate detailing, the vaulted ceilings, the polished brass fixtures, and the way the velvet seats seem to hold echoes of performances long past. But for those who work behind the scenes or venture in after dark, the beauty of the historic building is laced with something else entirely, a lingering presence that refuses to leave. The legend begins decades ago with a promising young actress named Eleanor Ellie Ward. In the early 1930s, she was a shining star in Portland's local theater scene. With every performance, her voice captivated audiences, her presence magnetic under the stage lights. It was said she had the potential to make it to Broadway, maybe even Hollywood, but fate had other plans. Ellie's last performance was during a production of The Phantom's Lament, a moody and ambitious Gothic play. The set design required a complex mechanism for raising and lowering scenery mid-scene, a novelty at the time. But on opening night, something went terribly wrong. As Ellie stood near the edge of the stage, delivering one of the play's most emotionally charged lines, a malfunction caused a large wooden beam to drop from the rigging above. It struck her instantly, and she died on stage, in front of a horrified audience. The tragedy was splashed across newspapers. Merrill Auditorium closed for several months. When it reopened, The Phantom's Lament was never performed again. But according to stagehands and night staff, Ellie's presence never truly left. In the decades since, countless stories have emerged from those who spend late hours inside Merrill. Security guards tell of hearing high heels clicking against the backstage floor, echoing through the wings when no one is there. Custodians have reported finding seat cushions pushed down, as if someone had just stood up, even though the theater had been locked and empty for hours. Some have even claimed to hear faint singing, an old song, one not in any recent program, drifting from the darkened stage. One longtime technician named Ray told a chilling tale that has circulated among Merrill staff for years. It was during a quiet Tuesday night in early autumn, and Ray had stayed behind to rewire some of the stage lighting. Around 1 a.m., with only the emergency lights casting a faint orange glow, he heard what sounded like a soft hum, a woman's voice, melodic, haunting, almost nostalgic. Thinking it might be a radio left on, Ray searched the area but found nothing. That's when he saw it, out of the corner of his eye. A figure appeared in one of the box seats overlooking the stage. It was a woman in a vintage cream-colored gown, seated upright, her gloved hands folded in her lap. She was watching him, but as Ray turned to look directly at her, the seat was empty. He never stayed late alone again. Some actors have refused to rehearse in the theater after sundown. One visiting soprano said she felt someone brushing past her on stage, even though she was rehearsing solo. Another performer was so disturbed after seeing a woman's reflection behind her in a dressing room mirror that she withdrew from the production entirely. Even the public has not been immune to the strange events. During a matinee performance of a light-hearted musical in 2012, several audience members claimed they saw a figure move silently along the upper balcony. When theater staff checked, the area was completely empty. No tickets had been sold for that section that afternoon. Many believe the spirit is Ellie Ward, the ill-fated actress whose dreams were cut short. Some say she is simply replaying her final moments, stuck in an endless loop of tragic memory. Others believe she remains because she was never able to finish her performance, forever longing for that final curtain call. The management at Merrill has never confirmed or denied the haunting, though one former director once mentioned unusual happenings in a local interview. Tour guides rarely bring up the subject unless prompted, but when asked, they will often smile knowingly and say, "Let's just say Ellie still loves the stage." There's even a rumor among theater folk that if you leave a single red rose in the front row on the anniversary of Ellie's death, you may hear a faint whisper from the balcony, a soft thank you, floating on the air before vanishing into silence. Skeptics chalk it all up to imagination, to creaking floorboards and overactive minds. But those who've worked at Merrill for any real length of time know better. It's not just a beautiful old theater with great acoustics and a rich history. It's a place where the past breathes softly through the curtains, where emotion and memory have soaked into the very walls. And when the lights go dim and the last visitor is gone, there's always the chance you might hear her, Ellie, humming the final notes of the performance she never got to finish. So the next time you find yourself seated in the quiet elegance of Merrill Auditorium, take a moment to listen when the room falls still. That soft sound, it might just be the ghost of Eleanor Ward, forever waiting for her encore. Let's get to part 2 of the story. The haunting of the Searles house, Biddeford, Maine. Tucked along a quiet tree-lined street in Biddeford, Maine, stands the old Searles house, an imposing Victorian structure with dark gables, stained glass windows, and ivy-covered brickwork that seems almost too quiet. Locals pass by it with lowered voices, and real estate agents won't list it unless they have to. The reason? For decades, people have whispered about the ghost that lingers within its walls, the restless spirit of a woman whose life ended in violence and whose presence continues to chill the air, especially on the upper floor. The house was built in 1892 by Jonathan Searles, a wealthy mill owner whose fortune came from textiles and shipping. It was meant to be a gift for his new bride, Lillian, a woman from Boston known for her beauty, wit, and strong will. Their marriage, at least at first, seemed happy, but something changed. Letters found later suggested growing distance, jealousy, and accusations of infidelity. While the exact events remain unclear, one thing is certain. Lillian Searles died in the house just 3 years after it was completed. Official records list the cause of death as blunt force trauma, and though no one was ever arrested, rumors have persisted for generations that Jonathan had something to do with it. Some say it was a fit of rage. Others claim Lillian was planning to leave him and met her end trying to escape. Regardless of the truth, Lillian was buried quietly, the press silenced by Jonathan's influence, and her death gradually faded from the public eye. But the house would not forget. Over the years, tenants came and went. None stayed for long. One family moved in during the 1940s and reported strange happenings from the first week. The mother, Clara, described hearing footsteps pacing back and forth upstairs at night, even when no one was there. Her children refused to enter the upstairs hallway, claiming it felt too cold, and that they could see a lady in white watching them from the top of the staircase. A local college student named Paul rented a room there in the early 1970s. He was a skeptic until the night he was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps right outside his door, followed by a long, dragging noise like someone pulling a heavy object across the floor. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty. Yet, one of the chairs from the guest room had been moved and was now facing the window, something he swore he hadn't done. Paul moved out 2 days later. The most terrifying account came from a couple who bought the house in the early 2000s, hoping to restore it as a bed and breakfast. They were drawn to its historical charm, its grand staircase, ornate moldings, and the romantic idea of preserving a piece of Biddeford's past. But their dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Within weeks of moving in, the wife, Rachel, began waking up at exactly 3:14 a.m. every night, drenched in sweat, insisting someone had whispered in her ear. The couple heard knocks on the bedroom wall, always in sets of 3. On several occasions, the upstairs hallway lights would flicker and go out, only to return when no one was looking. One morning, they found a mirror in the master bedroom shattered from the inside. Rachel's husband, Dan, tried to explain it all away, until he too began hearing the footsteps. They seemed to come from the same spot every time, just outside what had once been Lillian's dressing room, and it was always accompanied by a drop in temperature, so sudden that their breath would fog. Eventually, Rachel found old records tucked away in a crawl space behind a closet. They included Lillian's letters, written in increasingly frantic tones, some with dried smudges that looked disturbingly like blood. The final letter ended abruptly mid-sentence, with a blot of ink that trailed off the page. After that discovery, Rachel insisted they leave the house. They moved out within a week, abandoning their plans. The house has remained mostly vacant since, save for the occasional renter brave, or foolish, enough to try. Today, the Searles house sits in silence, yet it seems to listen. Visitors often report feeling watched, especially on the upper floor. Tourists who have passed by claim to see a flicker of movement in the upstairs windows, usually a figure standing still, dressed in old-fashioned white, gazing down at the street below. The phenomenon of cold spots is especially noted in the house, particularly near the landing of the staircase in Lillian's old bedroom. Paranormal investigators who have visited the site report unusually high EMF readings, unexplained whispers caught on voice recorders, and sudden equipment malfunctions. And always the footsteps. Some say Lillian is seeking justice. Others believe she's simply trapped, caught in the final moment of her life, doomed to relive it in the place where it ended. Whether one believes the stories or not, there's something undeniably heavy about the atmosphere inside the Searles house, especially when the wind rattles the old windows and the shadows stretch long across the floor. Locals avoid walking too close at night. Children dare each other to peek into the windows, but run screaming at the sound of a creak. And those who have stayed inside for more than a few hours almost always say the same thing upon leaving. Something is wrong up there. It's not just a house, it remembers. Let's get to part 3 of the story. Phantom Hitchhiker of Sebago Lake. Maine, a stretch of road running along the dense woods near Sebago Lake, is beautiful by day. The trees sway gently over narrow lanes, and the still surface of the lake reflects the sky like glass. But by night, that same road becomes something else entirely, quiet, too quiet. Locals call it Dead Man's Bend, though the maps say something more mundane. What the maps don't tell you is this: if you drive that road after midnight, especially when the mist is rising from the lake, you might see him. The man. Some say he's lost. Others say he's angry. But most agree on one thing: he doesn't belong to the living. It all began decades ago with a car crash that shook the Sebago community. It was a rainy night, the kind where the wind howls through the trees and headlights barely cut through the fog. The driver was a young man in his 30s, returning home from work. He was alone, and according to witnesses who saw him earlier that evening, unusually quiet. His name was Daniel Harper. He was well-liked, a local mechanic, recently divorced, trying to rebuild his life, but he never made it home. His car was found the next morning, half submerged at the edge of the lake. Twisted metal and shattered glass scattered across the nearby rocks. The authorities determined he had taken the curve too fast, possibly to avoid hitting something or someone. No other cars were involved, and no skid marks were ever found. It was as if he simply veered off, straight into the lake. Some said he may have fallen asleep. Others whispered that something pulled him off the road. He died on impact. The town mourned, but as with all tragedies, life moved on. The road remained. The curve was renamed quietly among locals, and Daniel Harper became another sad memory, until the sightings began. It started small. A couple driving home late at night reported seeing a man standing at the side of the road, right near the lake bend. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, his arm raised as if hitchhiking. They slowed down, unsure whether to stop, but as their headlights fully illuminated the spot, the man vanished. They told themselves it must have been the fog, or their imagination. But then it happened again, and again. Dozens of reports began to surface over the years. Always the same location, always the same man. He never moves aggressively, just stands there, looking for a ride. Some say he locks eyes with you before disappearing. Others claim he's already in your back seat by the time you realize what you've seen. One man, a trucker named Bill Connolly, swore he saw the hitchhiker one night while heading north from Portland. It was raining heavily, and Bill saw the figure out of the corner of his eye. The man's face was pale, soaked, and covered in cuts. Thinking it was a real person in trouble, Bill pulled over. He got out of the truck, yelling into the rain, but there was no one there. When he got back in, the passenger side door was slightly ajar, though he was sure it had been locked. A wet handprint remained on the dashboard. Bill quit that route the following month. A teenager named Emily, who had grown up hearing the ghost story, decided to drive that road alone at night to prove it was all nonsense. She live-streamed the trip with her friends watching. The first 20 minutes were uneventful, just trees, fog, and the sound of her laughter. And then the laughter stopped. On the stream, viewers suddenly saw Emily go silent. Her eyes widened. She turned her phone toward the side window, and for a split second, the shape of a man in a dark jacket appeared, walking beside the car, though it was moving at 40 miles per hour. Then the stream cut out. Emily's car was found half an hour later, parked safely at a gas station. She was inside, unharmed but shaken, unable to explain what had happened. She didn't remember driving there. She only remembered the man's face. It wasn't angry, she said. It just looked empty. Local paranormal groups have investigated the area extensively. EMF spikes have been recorded near the site of Daniel Harper's crash. Strange audio recordings have captured what sounds like distant knocking or a man whispering, "Help me." Some groups have set up cameras, only to find their batteries drained within minutes. And then there are the physical signs. Damp footprints along the road, seen in winter when there's no precipitation. The distinct sound of a thumb tapping on car windows, always in threes. And in some rare cases, passengers have reported a sudden, overwhelming sense of sorrow, followed by a strong urge to keep driving fast without looking back. One theory among investigators is that Daniel Harper's spirit is trapped in a loop, reliving the last moments of his life. Perhaps he's trying to warn drivers, hoping to save them from the same fate. Others believe he doesn't realize he's dead, that he's still trying to get home. But there are darker speculations. Some believe that whatever caused Daniel to crash wasn't human, and now uses his form as a lure. That the hitchhiker is only a mask for something older, something that thrives in the fog and silence along the lake. Regardless of the cause, the stories persist. Locals avoid that stretch of road when they can. Taxi drivers refuse to pick up rides after dark near the lake. And if you ask the old-timers about it, they'll just shake their heads and say, "You'll know him when you see him." So if you ever find yourself driving alone near Sebago Lake, and you spot a man standing by the roadside, thumb raised, staring at you through the fog, think twice before stopping, because sometimes the dead are not looking for help, they're looking for a way back. Let's come to part 4 of the story, the ghost train of Maine. Between Portland and Boston, there's a stretch of old railroad track between Portland and Boston that no longer sees much traffic. Most of the lines have been modernized, rerouted, or abandoned. The locals who live near the woods just off the old rail line will tell you the tracks aren't as empty as they seem, especially not on foggy nights. Legends call it the ghost train of Maine, a spectral locomotive that appears when the mist thickens, glowing dimly as it slices through the darkness. There are no whistles, no lights from the engineer's cabin, just a dull, rhythmic rumble in the earth, a low hum growing louder, and then a train that has no place in the world of the living. The origin of the tale is rooted in tragedy. In the early 1900s, a passenger train en route from Portland to Boston derailed during a violent winter storm. The exact number of casualties is disputed. Some say a dozen, others claim closer to 50, but all agree it was catastrophic. The train slid off the rails at a bend near Kennebunk, toppling into a ravine and catching fire. Many passengers never made it out. The wreckage burned for hours before emergency crews could reach it. The remains were eventually cleared, the track repaired. The line was later abandoned due to safety concerns. The area was left quiet for a time. Then came the reports. The first sightings were from nearby farmers, who swore they could hear the distant echo of a train late at night, long after the line was closed. At first, they assumed it was imagination, or perhaps wind twisting through the pines. But the sounds became more distinct, metal grinding, rhythmic clacking of wheels over rail, even muffled voices and faint music from a bygone era. One man, Arthur Glenn, who lived just a few hundred feet from the old tracks, claimed he saw lights cutting through the trees one October night. When he stepped outside to investigate, he saw the silhouette of an old steam train emerging from the fog. It made no noise, no smoke trailed from its deck, yet it moved smoothly down the rusted and used rails. Inside, he saw faces, dim, unmoving, pale. "They weren't looking at me," he said. "They were just staring forward, like they didn't know they were dead." Arthur's account was dismissed by some as the product of an overactive imagination, but more reports began to surface. Hikers, campers, and even local law enforcement officers began to describe similar encounters, always at night, always when the mist rolled in thick, and the train never stopped. One night, a group of teenagers dared each other to spend the night near the tracks to see if the legend was true. They brought cameras, flashlights, and enough bravado to keep their nerves steady, until just after midnight, when one of the boys heard what he thought was a deep rumble underfoot. The others laughed it off, until their flashlights flickered, and they all felt the vibration in the soil. One girl turned her camera toward the line, just as a strange pressure built in the air. From the fog emerged the ghost train, fully formed, yet hazy, as though light passed through it. They could make out the old-fashioned conductor's cabin, the riveted steel cars, and behind the windows, shadowy passengers. The girl screamed as one of the passengers turned to face the group directly. They ran. The footage, later uploaded online, was grainy and nearly unwatchable, just silhouettes and strange, unexplained audio interference. But the story made its way across forums and blogs, further fueling the legend of the spectral train. Paranormal researchers visited the site multiple times. One group left motion sensors and EMF detectors along the line, returning days later to find that nearly all their equipment had malfunctioned or mysteriously powered off. A thermal camera captured what appeared to be a plume of cold air moving along the tracks, exactly the width of a train car, and traveling far too quickly to be natural fog. But the most chilling accounts come from those who never meant to witness the ghost train at all. A couple driving home late one November night near the old tracks found themselves stopped at what appeared to be a railroad crossing. The lights were off, but the crossing arms began to lower. Confused and thinking it was a malfunction, they waited. Then, without warning, they heard the screech of metal and a rush of wind. The woman screamed as a full train materialized before them, flying across the road in absolute silence. And just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The crossing arms rose again. The couple drove home in stunned silence, unsure of what they'd just seen. One theory among spiritualists is that the accident from long ago left a psychic imprint on the area. The intense emotions of panic, fear, and loss are said to stay in the location, causing a residual haunting that plays out like a loop, forever doomed to repeat itself when the conditions are right. But others believe something more sinister is at work. They say the train doesn't just carry the dead, it seeks new passengers. There are a handful of tales, uncorroborated, but persistent, about people disappearing near the old line. A hiker whose camp was found untouched, fire still burning, but no trace of him. A local man who went for a walk with his dog and was never seen again, though the leash was found lying beside the tracks. And then there are the dreams. Some residents claim they've had the same recurring nightmare of being aboard a train, unable to move, surrounded by silent passengers. The world outside is black and foggy. No one speaks. No one breathes. The train rides endlessly through the night, never stopping, never arriving. When they wake, the sound of a distant whistle lingers in the air. So if you find yourself near the old railroad line on a misty night, listen carefully. That low hum under your feet may not be a trick of the wind. And if you see a train's light breaking through the trees, don't be curious. Don't wave. And whatever you do, don't try to board, because the ghost train of Maine only travels one way. And once you're aboard, you don't get off. Let's come to part 5 of the story. The Ghost of the Girl in the Forest. Maine's whispering pines. Deep in the rural woodlands of Maine, where pine trees stretch toward the sky like silent sentinels and fog clings to the moss-covered earth, there exists a tale that has been whispered around campfires and passed down through generations. It's a story about loss, about mystery, and about a ghostly presence that has turned a quiet forest into a place of unease. Locals call her the Girl in the Forest. No one remembers her name anymore. Some say she was a teenager from a nearby town. Others say she was never from the area at all, just a traveler, passing through. What everyone agrees on is this: one autumn, many decades ago, she entered the woods and never came out. The story begins with a family camping trip. A group of relatives, parents, cousins, and one young girl around 15 decided to spend a weekend in a quiet clearing off the logging roads. The girl, curious and independent, had wandered off one afternoon to explore the forest paths. Hours passed, then dusk, then night. She never returned. They searched for days. Bloodhounds were brought in. Volunteers combed the area. Nothing. No torn clothing. No signs of struggle. Not even a footprint. It was as if the trees had swallowed her whole. Eventually, the search was called off. The family moved away. But the forest never forgot. It began with stories, campers and hikers reporting the eerie sensation of being watched, even when they were alone. Then came the sightings, a flash of white from the trees, a girl standing still between the trunks, barefoot, her dress dirty and torn. When approached, she would vanish. One man, an experienced outdoorsman named Bill Torrance, told a story to the local paper in the late 1980s. He had gotten lost on an unmarked trail after sunset. The temperature was dropping fast, and his flashlight was nearly dead. Then he heard it, a soft voice calling his name. Not shouting, not panicked. Calm, gentle. I followed it because I thought I was hallucinating, Bill said. But the voice led me out, step by step. And when I finally broke through the tree line and saw my truck, I turned around to thank whoever helped me. But no one was there. He never camped in those woods again. Others weren't so lucky. There have been several cases, quietly handled, never widely publicized, of hikers who went missing in that same forest. A few were found days later, disoriented and chilled to the bone. They couldn't explain what had happened, only that they'd followed something they thought was help. A voice, a shadow, a girl. She looked sad. One survivor told a local ranger, like she wanted to tell me something, but couldn't, and she never blinked. The most unsettling part of these encounters isn't the girl's appearance. It's the atmosphere that surrounds her. The forest seems to grow colder when she's near. Sounds vanish. Even birdsong ceases, replaced by an unnatural silence. People describe it as the air getting heavy, like they've stepped into another world where time runs slower and the rules of reality bend. Some believe the girl is trying to help, that she appears to those who are lost or in danger, guiding them to safety the way no one came for her. Others, however, aren't so sure. Rangers have reported strange compass readings in the area where she was last seen. GPS units fail, batteries drain, and a few campers have returned from the woods with no memory of how they got back. Only that they had dreamed of a pale girl with long hair who stood just outside their tent all night, watching. Local legend says there's a specific tree deep in the forest, a twisted pine with scorch marks along its bark. Some believe this was where she was last seen alive. Others claim it marks the place where she died, though no body was ever recovered. On certain nights, if the fog is thick and the moonlight hits it just right, people say you can see her standing beneath it, silent, still, waiting. A paranormal team once set out to document the area, hoping to capture evidence of the ghost. They brought thermal cameras, spirit boxes, EMF detectors, the works. For hours, nothing happened. But just after midnight, their audio equipment picked up a faint voice whispering one of the team members' names. The next morning, the camera crew discovered their lead investigator had vanished. They found him half a mile away, unconscious but unharmed. When he came to, he kept repeating the same thing. She told me not to follow. Over time, stories of the girl in the forest have taken on an almost mythological tone. Some call her a guardian spirit, others a cursed soul, forever wandering the woods that failed her. Parents tell their children not to stray from the trails, not out of superstition, but caution, because sometimes the forest keeps what it's given, and sometimes it sends something back. To this day, hikers who find themselves off course in those woods near twilight report strange sensations. A sudden shift in wind, the sound of distant weeping, or a glimpse of a figure just at the edge of vision. Those who follow the voice often find their way home, but they never forget the feeling of being watched. And sometimes, just before they fall asleep, they hear her again, whispering, warning, waiting. Let's get to part 6 of the story, The Spirit of the Sea Captain. A Maine coastal haunting. Along the rocky, windswept coastline of Maine lies a small fishing village named Daggers Bay. It's the kind of place that doesn't appear on many maps, with its weather-beaten docks, shuttered seafood shacks, and foghorns that wail mournfully in the night. It feels almost frozen in time, but beyond its quiet charm and maritime traditions, there's a legend that every villager knows and fears. They call it the Spirit of the Sea Captain. The story goes back over 100 years, to the days when the waters off Daggers Bay were filled with schooners and merchant ships. Among the most respected sailors was Captain Elias Merrill, a man known for his commanding presence and unshakable discipline. He was a tall, gaunt figure with a voice that could cut through even the fiercest of storms. His crew respected him, feared him even, but they followed him loyally, voyage after voyage, until one winter night changed everything. According to village records and whispered accounts, Captain Merrill had taken his ship, the Saltwind, out during the height of a vicious nor'easter. Locals warned him to stay ashore, but he refused. There was cargo to deliver, and he wouldn't let a storm stand in the way of duty. He and his crew never returned. Days later, pieces of the Saltwind washed up along the cliffs, splintered wood, tangled rigging, and one of the ship's lifeboats, empty and half buried in the sand. No bodies were ever recovered. The sea had claimed them, or so it was believed. Not long after the wreck, strange sightings began near the old lighthouse and the surrounding waters. Fishermen reported hearing a deep voice calling out over the waves, issuing orders, barking commands, when no other boats were nearby. On foggy mornings, some claimed they saw a man in a long coat standing at the edge of the jetty, gazing out at sea, only to vanish as they approached. One fisherman, Paul Drennan, told a chilling account to a local newspaper in the 1950s. He had been returning to shore just before dawn when he saw another vessel moving silently beside him. No lights, no sound, just gliding effortlessly through the fog. On its deck stood a tall figure, arms crossed behind his back, facing forward like a captain surveying his path. Paul tried hailing the vessel. No response. When he blinked, the ship was gone. Stories like Paul's became common, too common to ignore. Older villagers say the ghost of Captain Merrill still sails the waters, looking for the crew he lost, or perhaps still trying to complete his final voyage. And sometimes, they say, he comes ashore. A handful of residents claim to have seen him walking near the docks during stormy nights. Always alone, always silent, a towering presence in a soaked coat, salt crusted in his beard, eyes like glassy pools reflecting the moonlight. He's never spoken, but those who've encountered him report the same bone-deep chill and the overwhelming sense that they are standing in the presence of something not entirely human. One woman, Clara Hastings, once ran a small inn near the harbor. She recalled waking one night to the sound of boots on the wooden floor below. Thinking it was a guest, she went to investigate, only to find the front door wide open and the scent of seawater thick in the air. As she turned, she saw him at the top of the stairs. His hand was on the railing, his coat dripping with though it hadn't rained in days. "You looked right at me," she said in a hushed interview. His mouth didn't move, but I heard a voice in my head. "We sail at dawn." And then he was gone. To this day, Clara refuses to live near the coast. Some believe Captain Merrill's ghost is harmless, a restless spirit bound to his ship, perhaps unaware of his own death. Others aren't so sure. There have been tales of boats mysteriously capsizing near the site of the Saltwind's wreck, compass readings that spiral out of control, radios picking up static laced with faint, barking commands. And then there's the legend of the Stormlight signal. Old sailors in Daggers Bay speak of a strange occurrence that happens once every few years. On a stormy night, just as lightning splits the sky, the old lighthouse, which has been decommissioned for decades, flickers to life. A single beam sweeping the waves. And if you watch closely, just beyond the rocks, you might see the Saltwind herself, sails tattered but full, crewless, and at her helm, Captain, Every time the stormlight signal appears, the following morning brings news of something. Sometimes it's a drowned gull. Sometimes it's a wrecked dinghy found floating with no one aboard. But always something lost. Modern paranormal investigators have tried to document the phenomenon. One group even spent a week camp near the lighthouse with sonar, drones, and night vision equipment. On the final night, their instruments recorded a deep voice repeating the same phrase over and over. "Hold steady, brace the mainsail. We sail at dawn." That night, their boat's mooring lines were found torn, despite calm weather. Whether Captain Elias Merrill is a tragic reminder of the sea's fury, or a cursed soul forever trapped between this world and the next, one thing is certain. The people of Daggers Bay don't go near the water after dark. They leave offerings, a bottle of rum, a sailor's cap, a candle in the window, to keep the spirit content. Because out here, the ocean keeps its secrets. But the captain, he doesn't forget. Let's move on to part 7 of the story, the ghost of the black physician's house. A haunting in Ogunquit, Maine, tucked away in a quiet, wooded stretch just outside the town of Ogunquit, Maine, stand a house known to locals as the Black Physician's House. It's not officially marked on any maps, and few speak of it openly. But for those who've lived in the area long enough, the stories are impossible to forget. The house itself is unassuming. A colonial-style home with chipped white paint, an overgrown lawn, and shutters that groan with every gust of wind. To a stranger, it might seem like nothing more than another forgotten building in New England. But to the townspeople of Ogunquit, that house is a place of deep unease. It once belonged to Dr. Samuel Greaves, one of the first African-American physicians to practice in the area during the early 1900s. He was known as a man of great intelligence and compassion, treating both rich and poor alike. People traveled from nearby towns to seek his help, and his reputation was that of a healer with almost uncanny knowledge of the body and spirit. But as the story goes, something changed in Dr. Greaves in the final years of his life. Some say it was the death of his wife, who passed unexpectedly from a fever that spread through Ogunquit one autumn. Others whisper that the doctor had begun to delve into things beyond medicine, spiritualism, seances, and rituals drawn from old medical texts no longer in circulation. Whatever the cause, those who visited the house in his final years described him as distant, distracted, and surrounded by strange artifacts. Mirrors covered in cloth, locked cabinets that rattled at night, and jars filled with unnamed substances. Then one winter morning, the house fell silent. The mail piled up. No one came to the clinic door, and when a local farmer finally broke in, he found Dr. Greaves seated in his study, slumped in a chair beside a fire that had long since gone cold. He had died alone, his hand clutching a notebook filled with illegible writing. They buried him in the town cemetery, under a stone marked simply, "Drive S. Greaves." He served all who came, but his house did not rest. The first signs were subtle, strange noises late at night, a light flickering in the second-story window, even though the electricity had been shut off. Then came the knocking. Several townspeople reported hearing loud, deliberate knocks at their doors during the night. When they answered, no one was there. On particularly foggy nights, the sound echoed all the way to the town center. 3 sharp knocks, then silence. Always the same rhythm. One night, a local teenager named Michael Jensen dared his friends to sneak into the Greaves house, armed with a flashlight and bravado. He climbed through a back window. What he saw, he would never fully describe. But when he returned an hour later, pale and shaking, all he could say was, "He's still there." He never left. Michael left town 6 months later and never returned. Others who've approached the house say they've seen the figure of a man in a dark coat, walking slowly along the upper hallway, pausing by the windows to stare down at the overgrown garden. Some say he carries a black bag, the kind doctors used in the old days. Others have seen him appear in the front doorway, only to vanish the moment they call out. Inside the house, those brave enough to enter have reported icy drafts that come from nowhere, shadows that move against the grain of light, and a ticking sound, as if an invisible clock still keeps time somewhere deep in the walls. One woman, a paranormal investigator from Boston, claimed she heard a voice whisper, "You must lie still," when she walked through the old examination room. But perhaps the most disturbing accounts come from those who hear footsteps pacing the upper floor, always following the same path, from the bedroom to the end of the hallway and back again, as if the doctor is still making rounds in his eternal house call. In 1974, a family bought the house with plans to renovate it. They lasted less than 2 weeks. The mother, a woman named Elaine Howard, wrote in her journal about the sounds. "Every night at 2:14 a.m., the house comes alive, knocking at the back door. Footsteps in the hall. Once, I saw him standing at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't move, just watched me. I told David we have to go. We are not alone here." The Howards fled without packing most of their things. The house has stood empty ever since. Interestingly, local legends claim that Dr. Greaves was not haunting the house out of vengeance or malevolence, but out of unfinished duty. In life, he was a man who never turned away a patient, never left a case unsolved. Perhaps in death, that same sense of responsibility keeps him tethered to the home he once filled with care. Still, responsibility or not, his presence is a source of dread. The Ogunquit Historical Society once tried to host a tour of the house during Halloween, hoping to capitalize on the legend. They managed to open the house for a single night, allowing in just a dozen guests. By the end of the evening, 2 had fainted, left in tears, and one local radio host was found standing in the basement, muttering. He told me to rest, but I can't. The event was never repeated. Now the house stands untouched, watched over by a rusted gate and a garden long overtaken by ivy. On stormy nights, some say they can see the light in the second-floor window flicker on, just for a moment before going dark again. And if you stand close enough to the front porch, you might hear it. 3 knocks. The ghost of the black physician still walks his halls, still tending to patients no one else can see. And if you ever find yourself near Ogunquit, driving past an old road that leads into the woods, remember this. Don't stop. Don't knock. And above all, don't answer the door after dark. Let's come to part 8 of the story. The ghost on the bridge, a haunting in the rain, in the stillness of rural Maine, where dense forests press and on winding roads and mist lingers over quiet rivers. There's a bridge that locals try to avoid after dark. It has no official name. On maps it's just County Bridge 47. But to the people of the surrounding town, it's known simply as Whispering Bridge. It's a narrow, iron-framed crossing suspended over the Kennebec River. Built in the early 1900s, the bridge has long been the subject of rumor, local lore, and whispered warnings. Some say it's cursed. Others say it simply remembers. But all agree on one thing. If you cross it at night, you never do so alone. The story begins on a stormy night over 60 years ago. According to town records, a man named Thomas Delaney, a local logger, was traveling home during an especially violent rainstorm. His truck was found the next morning at the edge of the bridge, driver's side door open, headlights still on, and the engine idling. But Thomas was gone. No sign of struggle. No blood. Just the sound of the river rushing below. Search parties scoured the surrounding forest and dragged the waters for days. They found nothing. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a boot print in the mud. The only thing discovered was a single, sodden footprint halfway across the bridge, and even that disappeared when the rain returned the next day. His disappearance was ruled an accident. Swept into the river by the storm, they said. But not everyone believed that. Over the decades, something strange began to happen. People who crossed the bridge after sunset, particularly on rainy nights, began to report an eerie presence. Some spoke of a cold breath on their neck, others of footsteps behind them, always just far enough away that when they turned, nothing was there. The most consistent tale was the sound of a deep sigh, a long, mournful exhale that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. In 1983, a college student named Erin Malloy was driving across the bridge when her engine suddenly stalled midway. As she tried to restart the car, she heard what she believed was someone walking slowly up to the driver's side door. The sound of wet boots on metal echoed through the car. She rolled down her window, and no one was there. But just as she turned back to her steering wheel, she heard it, a voice. "I didn't mean to fall." She left her car on the bridge and ran 5 miles through the rain to the nearest gas station. The mechanic who retrieved her car said the engine was in perfect working order. Over time, sightings grew more detailed. Several pedestrians reported seeing a shadowy figure standing at the center of the bridge, unmoving, even as headlights passed through it. Some say he wears a heavy coat. Others say he's soaked head to toe, dripping water onto the asphalt. But always, his face is hidden, either turned away or obscured by darkness. In 1996, a couple passing through Maine on a road trip decided to take a walk across the infamous bridge, unaware of its legend. Halfway across, the woman stopped, claiming she felt someone grab her wrist. When she pulled away, a red mark in the shape of a handprint remained for hours. Her partner insisted they were alone the entire time. What makes the haunting of Whispering Bridge so unsettling is its restraint. There's no overt violence, no ghostly screams or flying objects. It's the subtlety that terrifies, the feeling of being watched, of not being alone, of something following just out of sight. In 2008, a paranormal investigation team set up thermal cameras and EMF detectors on the bridge overnight. They captured no visual anomalies, but the audio recordings were different. In the dead of night, with no cars or people present, their microphone picked up the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. Then a whisper. It was faint but clear. Still raining. The investigators never returned. Some have suggested that the bridge itself acts like a conduit, a liminal space between life and death, memory and reality. Perhaps Thomas Delaney's spirit is not the only one trapped there. Over the years, other accidents have occurred on or near the bridge. A cyclist was struck by a car and killed in 1971. A teenager jumped into the river on a dare in 1999 and never resurfaced. And in 2015, a man walking his dog late at night was found lying unconscious just off the road, mumbling about someone in the rain who wouldn't let him pass. The bridge remains open to this day. Locals say if you have to cross it at night, you should never stop. Don't look in your rearview mirror, and if you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around, no matter how close they sound. For those who've dared to challenge the legend, most come away shaken but unharmed. But a few, or very few, vanish. Every couple of years, someone goes missing near the area, and each time, investigators find themselves back at Whispering Bridge, staring into the fog, listening to the river, and wondering, just for a moment, if maybe the stories are true. And when the wind dies down and the rain starts to fall, if you listen closely, you might hear it too. A sigh, a step, a whisper. I never made it home. Let's come to part 9 of the story. The spirit of the miner echoes beneath the earth. Deep in the northern woods of Maine lies the forgotten town of Gravel Ridge, a once bustling mining settlement that thrived in the late 1800s. Today, it's barely more than a ghost of itself, just a handful of worn foundations, rusting tracks, and the skeletal remains of wooden buildings long surrendered to time and moss. But there is one thing that has never left Gravel Ridge: the miner. Locals don't like to talk about the mines. Children are warned away from them, and even seasoned hikers give the area a wide berth after dark. It's not because of the risk of cave-ins or unstable tunnels, though those dangers are real. No, it's because of the sounds. Every so often, in the dead of night, the earth seems to come alive. Metal clinks echo across the trees, rhythmic and purposeful, as if someone deep below is still working with pick and shovel. And then there's the voice, not shouting, but muttering, low, hoarse, words that never fully carry, but make the hairs on your neck stand. The story begins over 140 years ago. In 1882, a miner named Elijah Moore was working the night shift in Shaft 9, one of the deepest and most dangerous tunnels in the Gravel Ridge mine system. That night, something went wrong. Accounts vary. Some say it was a gas leak. Others blame a poorly supported ceiling. But whatever the cause, the tunnel collapsed. 4 men were inside. Only 3 made it out. Elijah was never found. The mine was sealed within a week. It was cheaper and safer, the company said, then mounting a full recovery. His family protested, but their cries were lost beneath the weight of profit margins and corporate indifference. Elijah's name was etched onto a plaque, along with dozens of others who had perished in the mines. But many believed his soul was never truly at rest. The sightings began soon after. The first came from a watchman named Branson who patrolled the mine entrance. One night, he reported seeing a man standing just inside the sealed shaft, holding a rusted lantern. He assumed it was a prank, until the man turned, revealing a gaunt face coated in soot, eyes hollow but glowing faintly like embers. Branson quit the next morning and never returned. Others soon followed. A woman gathering berries near the tree line heard a terrible coughing fit from underground. A hunter spotted footprints in the mud near one of the abandoned carts, prints that ended suddenly at the mine's mouth, with no sign of departure. A pair of teenagers exploring the tunnels claimed to hear someone dragging metal across stone, but when they turned their flashlights on, they were alone. Over the years, the legend grew. Elijah Moore, a tireless miner, was still working. Some say he doesn't know he's dead, that he's forever trying to dig his way to daylight. Others believe he's angry, cursed to walk the tunnels because of the injustice done to him, his body never given a proper burial. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: his presence has never faded. In 1992, a local historian named Sandra Keller attempted to document the hauntings at Gravel Ridge. She brought with her 2 assistants, along with audio equipment and motion sensors. They camped near Shaft 9 for 3 nights. On the second night, just after 2 a.m., the motion detector at the entrance tripped. One assistant swore he saw a flickering lantern light moving slowly in the darkness, as if someone were pacing just beyond the hill. They recorded the sounds. It started with the soft clink of metal, then a grunt, then, faint but unmistakable, "Keep digging, light's close now." The voice was raspy, exhausted, and filled with a kind of desperate hope. Sandra left the next morning. She never published her findings, but the recordings were leaked years later to a small paranormal forum. The post has since vanished, but those who heard it never forgot it. Today, Shaft 9 is overgrown with weeds and cordoned off with collapsing wooden fence, but the barrier means little. The ghost doesn't stay underground. Residents of a nearby trailer park often complain of knocking sounds on the ground beneath their homes, usually around midnight. A retired man once claimed he saw a soot-covered figure standing in the mist outside his window, tapping at the glass with a miner's pick. And then there's the old road that runs behind the ridge. On foggy mornings, drivers have reported seeing a man walking along the shoulder, carrying a lantern, eyes downcast, coat tattered. When they pull over to offer help, he vanishes. Some believe the ghost is a warning, reminding the living not to forget those buried by greed and neglect. Others think Elijah's spirit has grown bitter over the years, angry that the world moved on while he remained trapped in the dark. But not every encounter is frightening. One hiker lost in woods during a snowstorm reported seeing a dim light weaving through the trees. He followed it for hours until it led him straight to the main road. He never saw who held the lantern, but he's convinced it was Elijah guiding him to safety. Even so, the mine holds its secrets close. No one has dared reopen Shaft 9. There have been offers, of course, developers and entrepreneurs hoping to turn Gravel Ridge into a haunted attraction. But every plan falls through. Equipment breaks, funding disappears, or in one case, the lead investor backed out after a dream in which he saw a man buried in rock, whispering over and over, "Still digging." They say the earth remembers, that when a man dies with purpose left unfinished, he becomes part of it. Not just a ghost, but a rhythm, a whisper, a presence that flows through the rock and soil like water. So if you ever find yourself in northern Maine, and the wind grows quiet and the night presses in, listen closely near the old ridge. You might hear the clink of metal. You might feel a breath of cold air rising from the ground. And if you do, take a step back. Say a prayer. And don't answer when the knocking comes from beneath your feet. Because Elijah Moore is still there. Still digging. Still waiting for the day he sees the sun again. Let's come to part 10 of a story. The spirit of the chef echoes in the kitchen. in the heart of Portland, Maine, where cobblestone streets wind between historic buildings and ocean air carries the scent of salt and old wood, stands a restaurant with a reputation not just for its cuisine, but for something far less savory. Locals call it Le Viandier. It's a French-inspired fine dining establishment that's been serving elegant dishes for nearly 70 years. But behind the polished service and delicate plates, whispers circulate about a presence in the kitchen. Not a sous chef, not a line cook, a ghost. They say the head chef never left. The story begins in the 1970s when Chef Henri Rousseau, a French-born culinary master with a fiery temper and obsessive standards, reigned over Le Viandier's kitchen. He was a perfectionist, demanding silence, precision, and devotion from his staff. Henri wasn't cruel, but he was intense. His kitchen operated like a ballet of sharp knives, hissing pans, and whispered commands. One night, during a particularly hectic Friday dinner service, a fire broke out on the stovetop. A bottle of cooking oil had tipped too close to the flame. Henri, instead of evacuating, tried to smother the fire himself to save his beloved kitchen. A sudden burst of flame engulfed the chef's coat. He was rushed to the hospital, but died of burns and smoke inhalation 3 days later. The staff was devastated. The kitchen went silent for a full week, and when Le Viandier reopened, something changed. At first, it was small things. A knife misplaced, a pan found hot when no one had turned on the burner, doors opening on their own. One prep cook, alone in the kitchen early in the morning, swore he saw a figure in a chef's coat move past the pantry door, tall, upright, and fast. Henry's still checking the mise en place, the staff would joke. But the jokes soon wore thin. Knives clattered off racks with no explanation. Carefully plated dishes were found altered, garnishes moved, sauce drizzles reshaped into more elegant curves. A sauce pot once flew across the room, narrowly missing a new line cook who had been joking about how he'd do things better than Henri ever did. He quit the next day. Then came the night chef Elena Marquez joined the staff as executive chef. Talented and innovative, Elena was brought in to restore Le Viandier's reputation and modernize its menu. She spent days reorganizing the kitchen, removing old equipment, and tossing out recipes Henri had created decades earlier. That's when things escalated. On her third night, the kitchen radio, which hadn't worked in years, suddenly came to life, blaring a French opera at full volume. No one had touched it. Elena laughed it off, until she noticed the entire prep station she'd reorganized had been returned to its original configuration, perfectly, with the same worn cutting board and dented spice tins. It was like someone put everything back the way it should be, she recalled later. Everything Henry's way. Her team began to speak of a cold spot near the stove where Henri had collapsed. No matter the heat in the kitchen, the floor beneath it remained chilled, and sometimes, late at night, if the kitchen lights were off and the restaurant empty, the staff upstairs would hear the distinct sound of chopping, steady, rhythmic, practiced. Cleaning staff refused to enter after midnight. Elena, skeptical but curious, set up a security camera one night, aiming it directly at the stove and prep station. When she reviewed the footage, her blood ran cold. Between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., the camera captured knives moving on their own, gliding across the counter. A bowl shifted 2 inches to the left. A ladle lifted and turned, as if stirred by an unseen hand. Most disturbing of all, for a few seconds, just as the video pixelated, the shadow of a man in a chef's coat and tall hat flickered into view, standing motionless at the center island, head bowed as though inspecting a dish. She deleted the footage. Despite all this, Elena chose to stay. "I believe it's respect," she once said in an interview. "Henry's watching. He spent his life in that kitchen. He can't let go, and maybe he doesn't want to. As long as we cook with care and precision, he stays quiet. But when we cut corners, he reminds us." New staff are quietly told the rules. Never curse the old recipes aloud. Always return knives to the rack precisely. Do not rearrange the spice shelf after midnight. One night, a young apprentice forgot to sharpen Henry's old favorite knife, a long, carbon steel blade still kept out of respect, though rarely used. The next morning, they found it embedded in the butcher's block, upright, quivering slightly, as though someone had just driven it in. And yet, despite the haunting, many chefs feel grateful. They speak of moments when they reach for an ingredient only to find it already waiting at hand, when they almost burn a sauce, only for the stove's heat to lower without explanation, when a new dish seems inspired by something they can't explain, as if someone is guiding their hand from beyond. A former pastry chef even claimed that during a moment of panic, a collapsed soufflé minutes before service, she heard a deep French-accented whisper behind her, "Again, but do not overfold." She followed the advice. The soufflé was perfect. Now, diners at Levaindeer sit unaware that only a few feet from their elegant plates, a ghost still haunts the flame and steel of the kitchen, pacing, watching, correcting. Henri Rousseau may be long gone, but his passion, his presence, and his obsession with excellence remain as palpable as ever. And if you find yourself at Levaindeer one evening, and your dish is just a little too perfect, balanced, artistic, transcendent, look through the narrow kitchen window. You might see a shadow pass between the prep stations, and you'll know